Hello and welcome to NUS Now, an energy management and sustainability podcast. I'm Daniel Farris, and today we've been fortunate enough to be joined by a global leader in environmental commodity markets, STX. I'm joined as well by Joelle.
Hi, nice to meet you.
So, Joelle, do you mind telling us initially a bit more about yourself, what you do, and maybe a bit more about STX as well?
Yes. Yeah, nice to meet you. My name is Joelle. I've been working with STX since 2021, just before the markets kicked off on the renewable side. My background is a bit more in policy and environmental finance, and since then been working with a bunch of different corporates across the globe, across different industries, on their decarbonisation journey and helping them gain access to different environmental markets. STX itself, we are a trader of environmental commodities. We've been around since the early 2000s, starting off with the EUA market, and since then have actually got 50 product groups in our portfolio across the globe, across different energy aspects. So anything from scope 1, 2, and 3, whether that's electricity, gas, or different fuel types, everything on the renewable side. We trade that both in wholesale markets. So that's really where we come from. And then since the last 5 to 6 years, we've been also working with end clients directly to help them gain access to these markets.
Thank you very much. Now, you've, of course, coming across from the Dutch office, so
Yes.
we appreciate you being here in one of the hottest days of the year. But today we're going to be discussing about navigating the expanding environmental markets and, the fact that they're under constant change. Now, in recent time, there have been multiple reports coming out about businesses and their progress towards their decarbonisation targets. For example, PwC recently released a report that stated that 82% of businesses have actually stuck with or accelerated their decarbonisation targets. And in the long term, a lot of businesses are seeing real benefit from this. 25%, for example, of sustainable products are actually seeing a return in a net positive economic way as well. There seems to be quite a lot of focus on how businesses can portray themselves as being more green. And I was wondering if STX has seen much of a shift in businesses becoming more decarbonising and becoming more focused on their targets and, the sort of purchasing of EACs that can support that.
Yeah, for sure. So when I originally joined in 2021, most of the conversations were, sustainability is so expensive and how am I going to get budgets for this? Is the budget coming from sustainability? Is this going to be part of procurement? So you could really see at the beginning it was quite difficult for companies to actually make a budget for decarbonization. And there was a lot of reluctance from maybe their, let's say, finance department saying, why do we need this? All of these different things. Throughout the year, of course, we've had lots of regulation that also supports investing into sustainable solutions. But we also see now that companies are actually seeing sustainability as a business opportunity. So throughout the years, we've really seen companies really strategically thinking, what can I purchase to then also sell a green premium to my clients or market it in a different way, right? So we really see the shift from looking at commodities, especially on the environmental side or energy, from shifting from looking at it as a cost to what opportunities can I get out of it. So that's been quite a fun journey to also see companies really switching it, changing where their budgets are lying, looking into the opportunity side of things as well.
Yeah, of course. And as you mentioned and touched on there's sort of the customer-led focus too. Yeah. So identifying that businesses who portray themselves as being very green, purchasing renewable certificates, for example, to cover off fuels they may not be able to decarbonise otherwise, they can really showcase that and then see the returns from consumers who are actually looking to buy from those sustainable companies.
Yeah, that's it's been a nice shift to see that for sure.
Yeah, and of course, STX deals with a wide range of commodities. You actually work with stuff like renewable gas, sustainable aviation fuel, biofuels, but also electricity, renewable electricity and carbon offsets as well. Mm-hmm. In terms of the market around that, is there much that you see in terms of people being slightly hesitant to go towards it? For example, we're looking for something like biofuels. They're not recognised by some standards. So is there much hesitancy you see around businesses?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think biofuels has always been a little bit more, let's say, not a low-hanging fruit, right? So I think when you look at decarbonisation, the last few years, big focus was on electricity because this was actually quite easily done and recognized. So there's real recognition behind it. It's not seen as an offset, it's seen as a reduction. So you actually do have, of course, more visibility on those products. Looking at biofuels itself, it's actually quite difficult to really understand the product because a lot of the times it's also blending. So it's not that you suddenly switch from gray to green, but there's actually a blending happening that actually reduces the amount of CO2 in your operations. So that makes also an impact on your actual production. If you look at, for example, different materials like glass, it really depends on what energy you put in, what then also the quality of the result or the product itself is. So there you do see a change in general production and ways of working. And then, of course, another thing is it's a physical product. So all the products that we trade at SDX predominantly are on the certificate schemes or financial solutions that you cancel in certain registries. And then biofuels, of course, is a physical product. So that comes also with deliveries, making sure that each location gets the supply that they require. And it's also not a secret that that market is still growing, right? Looking at SAF, for example, there's not that much out there. Hence, also, it's quite difficult to actually implement into your operations and consume, whether that's on scope 1 or maybe on your scope 3 emissions as well.
Yeah, of course. And in terms of that, using SAF as an example, that quite narrow market, not much supply out there, how do people like STX or even clients sometimes navigate those really restricted markets?
Yeah. So at the moment, we've been working on the product itself, I think, for 1 or 2 years on an actual trading side. So we've been monitoring the market for many years, of course. But trading the product, it's now been 2 years, I believe. The way we see it, we see now, of course, SBTI recognizing it as a product as well. So that obviously pushes the product now as well, that there's more recognition out there. So that, of course, helps companies actually making that switch. And another thing is actually a lot of companies who might not be on the manufacturing side, who have a lot of scope 3 emissions, see this as a great opportunities. If you think about certain companies that have lots of travel, they, of course, see that as a good opportunity for them to also reduce some of the emissions on their scope 3 that they can't directly reduce.
Of course, and it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy where more people wanting to buy it means that more people will invest in the actual production of it, and therefore the market will slowly open and unwind itself almost to make it more available.
Yeah, you need some investment to get it going.
Yeah, exactly. So, of course, when talking about renewable gas, SAF, and other biofuels, that's obviously relating more to your scope 1. Renewable electricity, obviously in your scope 2. And then focusing on your scope 3, what sort of products are available out there to support in decarbonising your scope 3?
I think since I've been in this market, which obviously is long for some, short for others, scope 3 has always been the hardest, right? And it's such a difficult thing to really nail and define. So one thing that we have seen really working out is customer engagement or supplier engagement. So it always depends a little bit what a company also sees their scope 3 as, right? So if you're a retailer on high street versus a big manufacturer, it is really difficult to really, let's say, nail what to do on scope 3. What we have been seeing in the last few years, it's really starting to look at a value chain decarbonisation together, because ultimately your scope 1 is someone else's scope 3. So we do see sharing knowledge, and that kind of thing has worked. So that, of course, is a bit vague and difficult to really monitor and calculate. So, of course, all these data providers, they really come in and now help also making sure that some of this data is collected and, being able to also be reported. Going back, obviously, a few years ago, carbon offsets themselves have been a big topic. Personally, I prefer to call them carbon projects, because the term has, of course, had a little bit of, not the best eye in the markets over the years. But there are really great projects out there. And that's something that we always say with our customers as well, looking at carbon projects. It's really depending on where your operations are, what kind of operations do you have, and then you can actually find a really suitable project. Most companies have that are globally located. They, of course, have also different operations in different countries where these projects are originating from. So that's also a nice way to actually go a bit more local in your local operations. The carbon market is massive. So that's also very difficult to really understand, like, what is out there, what suits my operations, and what is something that my company wants to support. And that could, of course, also be different SDG goals that they maybe have on a different sustainability side as well, right? So this is a perfect way to combine the energy side with maybe some social goals that you also want to reach, whether that might be water or, some social goals in your SDG targets as well.
Yeah, of course. And you touched upon a really important part there midway through. So the Berkeley Carbon Trading Project's voluntary offsets database was analysed back in December 2023. They found that since the beginning of records, 3.3% of all carbon offsets retired were seen as pure removals. And that's quite a damning thing, because you can see that 96% plus of everything that has been retired in relation to the carbon offsets projects aren't as high quality as they should be. Now, people may not know, but carbon offsets are split into carbon reduction and carbon removal, and carbon removals are typically seen as the higher quality removals that can be applied against something like your scope 3. And so the idea of, where can we get those extremely high quality removals, how can we source them appropriately so that they're potentially in the right markets, is something that has STX ever really explored as well?
Yeah, so we've been, obviously, the carbon market is a little bit where we come from, right? So when the ETS was introduced into the market, carbon was a big thing. So we've been in the carbon space for 25 years, also together with our sister company Vertis, who's part of the wider STX group. So carbon is a big topic for us. We've explored very different angles, but we also very quickly realized that space changes quite rapidly. You have all these different players out there who also look into ratings and giving it different ABCs and whatever you see. So we do see there's a lot more attention to the projects themselves. When I first joined, it was really like, I need X amount and our price target is X. Then you would just send them whatever would be for those criteria. Now you start really looking into what are the standards that you potentially internally have made an analysis on, what are different regions that you maybe want to exclude because that doesn't have to do anything with your operations. So the way that we have seen that space change is really looking at the different specifications of each project. For some, it's really the vintage, so they really want to buy something very recent. For some, it's really the project themselves, right? So they really want to make sure that there's a personal story to the company that they can actually say. So that we have seen a little bit change over the years. And the way that we now see it has definitely become more of a part of the procurement process, especially for things that simply cannot be reduced in another way. So we do see it still being part of purchasing, but we also do see it that it's more aligning with sustainability to really look into the project versus maybe some other of the commodities that we trade with. So you also see different kind of departments working with these, let's say, projects or topics. So this is still a very much sustainability-driven topic compared to some of the other products that we trade.
Yeah, of course. And I think in the sense of the wider markets and the wider different certificates that can be purchased, it's going to be very much along the lines of the renewable electricity markets as well, because with the scope 2 consultation changes that have been coming about, people will be looking at more specific projects.
Yeah.
And so they're really looking for that granularity.
Yeah. Which is, I think, also a really exciting time because there's so many new projects coming live. So it's also a really good time to go into it. The market is kind of ready for it. They've been expecting it. So now I think it's also just really important that customers really look into the pricing and get familiar with those different markets.
Of course, and you need people who are market experts in this in order to drive forward an actual decarbonisation plan, rather than people who are just going to be, in some cases, guessing as to what to get. And what sort of oversight do you have over the projects that can be chosen from? Are you able? What sort of granularity is STX able to get? And in that vein as well, other traders, when it comes to specific projects that businesses might be looking to purchase from.
Perfect. And this is on the carbon side?
This is on either renewable or renewable electricity or on the carbon side.
So there's a bunch of different projects out there, of course. I would always suggest to think a little bit internally, what are the real factors that you have identified internally that is something that you want to implement, right? So looking at strategy, of course, is one, looking at what products do you want to buy, but another thing is also what is important to us as a company. Cost is always a big topic, but there's also different factors that come into that, right? So how risk adverse are you? So I always say like risk versus sustainability is always something that you have to look at, right? Because markets change so quickly. So you need to also understand, can your market or your company in that sense switch as fast as maybe the markets do. So that is something that I always recommend, to really start looking at it from what is important to us. Is it a certain amount? Is it on a, let's say, time level, or is it on a cost level? And that's a little bit where you should start, and then also kind of see what projects are out there. So of course, that also requires to have a good connection with different suppliers to really understand what different options are out there.
Yeah, absolutely. So the idea around this as well is that some businesses will be constrained in some ways.
Yes.
So when it comes to looking at the more regulatory and market-based side, things like the SBTI say that you can only really use up to 10% of your baseline portfolio's carbon emissions as carbon offsets. They see that as the residual emissions, the ones that you can't remove. And so when it comes to businesses identifying the right projects, they want to make sure that not only are they getting down to the right level from their base year, so that 10% mark, but they're also credibly being able to decarbonize it, because it doesn't work the same, does it, when someone decides to just put a bunch of reductions in there that are low quality, that will eventually come to bite back and be seen as some form of greenwashing in many respects.
No, exactly. It's been really difficult for companies. So I also respect like all these sustainability leaders coming together and trying to understand a little bit what's everyone doing, because there's so many different angles that you can take, right? There's no one perfect way and one solution fits all. If you're an American company or if you're located in Europe, you have different dynamics that are currently happening as well. I mean, we all know the European economy had its challenges over the years. So is it that easy to start from zero and buying the most expensive carbon removal out there? Probably not, right? So it's also really looking at a pragmatic way to get to the target that you want to reach. And that might also mean that throughout the years, you add new criteria and you don't go from 0 to 100, right? So that's also something where we guide a little bit our clients on building kind of like realistic portfolios, whether that's on the carbon side or on the renewable electricity side, to really build a realistic portfolio that still brings you certain flexibility in case certain standards, dynamics maybe change. So I would always say flexibility is important in making these strategies, because we have seen how quickly standards announce that they're potentially going to change something.
Yeah, I think that's one of the big problems. It's always a consultation, never an actual change.
Or national goals, right? We always forget a little bit on global decarbonisation that countries themselves also say certain guidelines.
Yes, I mean, the Energy Efficiency Directive actually lays that out as well. Obviously, they've had a recast recently, which has slightly strengthened those targets. But as you said, countries are wanting to push it. And so they're going to be, I think, putting a bit more pressure on businesses themselves, especially the larger ones. And then, as you mentioned, they're going to have to become a bit more adaptable. And I suppose this is one thing which I think is quite difficult. If you're within a business, you've got to sort of balance the idea of country-specific reductions, where, for example, the Royal Decree 214 in Spain is only for Spain, and you've got to set a Paris-aligned target only for there. However, that's not mandatory in some other countries. So I think the consistency across the whole group is really important, instead of just focusing on one country, because otherwise you'll be left behind elsewhere.
Yeah, correct. I think something that we always say a little bit, that policymakers also need to align a little bit with each other, because we have all these different schemes across Europe when it comes to different state aids or different ways to maybe gain from certain schemes through different procurements. But then if everyone has a different timeline and different criteria, it makes it so difficult from a procurement perspective, because we see a lot of buyers trying to say like, okay, I need X, Y, and Z for these countries, but on a global level, our strategy is trying to support this and that, right? So especially on the electricity side, for any RE100 members, they obviously focus on a certain standard given by the RE100, but then maybe they also have to follow national subsidy schemes, which actually have different, let's say, procurement criteria. So that's quite challenging, and we see that especially in Europe becoming more and more challenging for procurement departments to really know what exactly to procure, because each country has different criteria.
Of course, and looking at the wider sphere then, how do you see an adaptable structure, and what are the common hedging practices that you typically see with clients?
Yeah. Hedging has changed quite a bit over the years. Of course, a couple of years ago, the markets were pretty high on the renewable side, so only the brave went out there to really hedge out. The last few months, it's been really, really exciting to see companies really coming back, knowing what they want to procure. They've had the last few years to also understand the markets and the dynamics, and now also see like, okay, in Europe, disclaimer here, in Europe, the market has been pretty favorable to potentially go into hedging now. So you see companies, obviously, they're a bit slower when it comes to getting sign-offs internally. So to any big leaders out there, also try and familiarize yourself as early as possible how these markets work. So if your colleague comes up and says, hey, let's hedge now, that there's not too many questions internally and you can act fast. Because that's something that you have to do, right? When it comes to hedging and taking certain dips in certain markets, you have to act fast, which is very difficult for very large companies, because they need to explain why are they doing it now. And unfortunately, most of these markets are still pretty intransparent compared to, let's say, traditional power markets where you can actually see pricing and that kind of thing. So that's where we also help our companies or our corporates that we work with to show them where have markets been, to really educate them and their team internally to make these decisions, and hopefully can act fast when the opportunities come.
Of course, and there's a lot of large businesses which have a lot of red tape internally as well. So when a procurement manager comes and he realizes I've only got a couple days in order to secure something, that becomes a massive bottleneck and a massive issue, because it can sometimes take more than that, and then the opportunities pass, the market changes,
and you have to start from scratch.
Yeah. Of course, in terms of the biofuel side that we were referencing earlier, it is quite a limited market. I mean, there are a few different solutions. For example, you can have RGAs, renewable gas agreements, that operate in a very similar way to a PPA, but you typically have to have quite a large offtake for something like that. And the deals tend to go on for 5, 10 plus years, and you're very much locked in. So you would say, obviously, that the purchasing of these sorts of certificates and offsets to cover renewable gas would obviously be a better solution, and I assume for the hedging strategy as well.
Yeah, that's true. I think something that I really noticed over the years is once you go green, you kind of have to stay green. So whatever you kind of start, you really need to think about how can I maintain that throughout my operations in the coming years, right? So making that switch when the market is super low on a certain commodity, and then next year it's higher, are you really going to be able to jump back? So that is something that you always kind of keep in the back of your mind when you make let's say, a decision to really go for a new strategy or implement something new. And that can be on the electricity, gas, or on the fuel side. In Europe, of course, over the last few years, we've also had a switch from fuel operations to gas, and now we're also seeing a lot of gas going into electricity. So that's always something to also keep in mind, right? So a lot of my customers that I work with on the manufacturing side, they're also now going through an electrification process across their manufacturing plants. So that is something that we see. So we do see the future need for more expansion on the electricity side. But then, of course, there are lots of markets that still heavily rely on gas and also fuels. So for those markets, you also have to think a little bit like logically what makes sense in my production processes. And then we, of course, also have certain industries that can actually gain from their own production and their own waste. and actually use their own waste in their production and keep that as a feedstock. So looking, for example, at consumer goods, especially if they have some sort of farmers in their value chain, you do see a little bit more connection throughout the value chain to use certain waste streams as actual feedstocks. So that's a nice little fix. So I would say, again, it's no solution for everybody, but different industries have actually different opportunities also looking at biofuels.
Yeah, of course. You touched on a really important point, and we'll get a bit more onto that later on. But that switch in fuels, and then also the energy efficiency side in terms of driving it down as much as possible, is quite key. Not least because it can sometimes give you a lot of flexibility.
Yeah.
But also when it comes to the long-term strategy, you end up saving money not just on the certificates, but also on your base load as well. So it's really very much, I think, oftentimes a bit where large corporates do miss out on. And you know, the investment, it's very much like a game of Monopoly. You have to put a bit of money in order to get something out. And in the long term, that can really work. But I think for some companies, maybe like SMEs, they might struggle to make such large capex down payments on brand new units or anything like that. And they may be a bit more inclined to the hedging strategies that we were talking earlier. So how do you see that working with SMEs? And I can understand it's quite a confined space for them, so it is quite difficult.
It is difficult indeed, but I think there's always a starting point for everybody, right? So I think in that sense, if you're smaller or bigger, the starting point would be always looking at your own production or emissions. If maybe you're not a producer, but maybe you're a service company, whatever you might be, you always have to look at what am I currently actually consuming on those different levels. So energy efficiency is always a good starting point, whether you're a small or a larger company. Something that we do see a little bit the disconnect is global decision makers or strategy people who are actually looking into their decarbonisation goals. They sometimes don't have the connection to all the facility managers. So I think it's also a good starting point to collect information from different facility managers. What are things that you could potentially improve on your side that could help to actually reduce emissions? And within Europe, we of course have these energy efficiency measures in place that also help you to actually finance some projects. So this is also something that we work in, and also why we expanded across Europe in different offices to really work locally with facility managers on finding those projects that you can actually reduce emissions with, and then potentially we can also help to find financing for it. So energy efficiency is a great space to actually start, and then you can always see, okay, now I have done what I can do with the investments that I currently have available. What can I now actually procure from the market? And that's also something that we can help. We, of course, work very closely with the utility markets as well. So if you are a smaller corporate coming to the market, and because maybe you don't have the largest volumes, it's difficult to do, let's say, the A to Z transactions, maybe your utility can help out with that as well, because they can buy in bulk and kind of gain from that. So I think it's always good to kind of do the first round to see, can I do it myself? Would there be additional costs because of maybe the size that I'm operating in a pretty large wholesale market? Or is it maybe something good to actually work with my partners on as well?
Yeah, and that approach is very much focused on cost savings and the benefits around that. As you mentioned, your utility provider can probably get you something in a bundled form because they purchase it on a large scale. For other businesses, they may see it as unbundled being the better way to go. And oftentimes, if you can get the market right and you have the strategy in place, then you end up being sometimes better off than going through a utility provider. But it very much depends.
Exactly, yeah. And that's kind of going back to what we discussed earlier, right? It's like sustainability versus risk or financing aspect, right? So like, where's the cost? Is it when I do it myself, or am I spending too much time on it? So you always have to look a little bit at all these different factors that can help you actually make a decision in the end of the day.
Yeah, and pricing and indices themselves don't always reflect real procurement conditions. And I was just wondering if you could tell me a bit more about how that comes about and what that looks like.
Yeah, sometimes we get these requests from customers who are just like, hey, we're currently looking to see how much it would cost me to go green 100%. And we're like, okay, it would cost you today X amount. Then 6 months later, they're like, okay, that sounds cool, let's do it. And then we're like, okay, sorry, but actually this and that market has increased, but that market has decreased. So what do you want to do now? Oh, okay, let me talk to my manager, So like you do see a little bit that decision can take quite a long time if you do it the first time. Then I don't think there's that many corporates out there, to be quite fair, at a larger size who are just kicking it off. But you do see, depending on where you are located in the world and along the value chain, that maybe you are at a different speed when it comes to understanding the markets, right? So maybe you just made the switch from an unbundled solution going into like, okay, I'm going to buy this from the market directly. Let's say skip the middleman or woman. So in that sense, you can actually gain from buying it yourself if you are at a certain size and also have the certain partner obviously with you as well. So I would say when it comes to the reality of things, we have seen a switch from sustainability looking at the topic, especially on electricity, which is a very volatile market in itself, because as we know right now, probably there's a lot of solar produced, but maybe not so much hydro. So, depending on the weather, of course, there's also different production coming to the market. So that is something to keep in mind. We've had very dry years, and that also led to very little production on the renewable side, and then ultimately increases the price. If you do not consider that in your decision making, then you are missing a little bit the reality aspect of things. So that is something to always keep in mind. Stay informed, signing up to different newsletters, get information, ask for pricing. We're starting to really see a lot more transparency coming to the market. So I would always encourage to really try and keep up to date and implement those tips if you can in your procurement strategy, and then also making sure that internally the understanding is there, that you don't just make a decision based on one price, but maybe looking into price ranges. So over the last 6 months, prices have been between X and Y, for example.
Yeah, of course, and that also depends on the quality of what you're looking at as well. For example, if you're procuring in the US, you have the Green E level certificates, and that can largely influence them. But again, as you mentioned before, sometimes it can become mandatory to get that level of quality in order to really showcase what you're doing or to be part of certain schemes, because they won't just accept any random certificate. Yeah. And so when a business comes to looking at this from the very beginning, they have absolutely nothing. They're just, firstly, don't really have a sustainability team or any procurement strategy in terms of purchasing, anything like this. What do you think they should do, and what does the journey look like from the very beginning to end?
I think right at the beginning, you should always think a little bit about who's in your team, who's part of, let's say, the round table to look into it, right? I would always suggest you need to have somebody that's familiar with the processes that the company has. You need to have somebody that is a procurement expert who understands a little bit how things work. You need someone from sustainability. You need to have finance involved. They need to understand what budgets potentially are coming your way. So you really need to have a very diverse group to start with. That helps a lot. If you just have 2 or 3 people, it's sitting in the corner, coming up with a great strategy, they say, let's go. And then everyone internally is like, I'm sorry, you're not getting the budget, you're not getting the sign off, whatever it might be. So I would always recommend to make sure from the beginning onwards that you have different departments coming together, because that really helps you to actually push topics along and create that understanding throughout different departments. So that is, let's say, a little bit more on an internal level. And then all of these people, they also, of course, bring different knowledge to the table. So also different perspectives, like maybe we should look at that, or that's a good idea, right? So that creates conversation. So having different people internally together helps. And then finding also partners that have not only a name in the space, because I do appreciate throughout the years there's a lot of different providers out there who kind of on the, let's say, when you look at it, kind of all do the same thing, right? So it's very difficult to really understand where do I go, who do I ask, who's going to give me that information, and who's also going to give me the right information. So I think partnerships, whether that's with, let's say, what you have with your clients, or what we do with our clients, or what we do together with, let's say, shared clients, it's always who you, let's say, build a trust with a supplier, right? So I think building trust with a supplier, having the right people internally, and then also making sure that you can actually execute your strategies is always good. In terms of products, start with the low-hanging fruit, and that can really depend on who you are. If you're a retailer, it might be that you actually have to look into the carbon space because you don't actually own a lot of your own production. So a lot of it is in scope 3. So you need to start at scope 3. If you're a big manufacturer, most likely you're going to start with scope 2. So it really depends a little bit who you are and what space you work in.
I completely agree. The main thing I think from our end as well is the data side.
Yeah.
You can't reduce what you don't know. You have to be able to demonstrate that you are making a informed decision about what you're purchasing, how much you're purchasing, how you can hedge in the future, and especially when it comes to granular oversight as well. It might be looking at energy efficiencies and how you're going to target different measures and put them in place. But if you don't have oversight of, say, sub-meter level, then you can't actively decrease your energy consumption enough so that you can then start focusing as well on the certificates. So you get sort of the dual benefit of your commodity reductions, but then also the certificate cost reductions as well. You can get that dual cost benefit.
Yeah, maybe to jump on that idea, that is actually why we also created a platform for our clients to keep that data. We are a very traditional transactional driven trading house, so we trade large volumes with 7,000 plus counterparties annually. So we do have a large client base, and it can get messy. I have certain companies that had, let's say, 50 plus countries of consumption. On the electricity side alone, that might be 50 deliveries. So we created a data platform where they actually can not only put in their actual consumption and follow their process, but that's also the idea to expand that across all products, right? So it's really important to keep that information safe, that you can then also share that with the different reports that you might have to do, CDP, RE100, what you name it, but also maybe your clients.
Yeah, of course. We have obviously a very similar platform as well that's more focused on the utility side, so you get the oversight, the data quality.
So important.
I can't stress it enough. And when you come to do things like site visits, you get an engineer out to site who can then show you, one site which may be representative of your whole portfolio. When that decarbonisation journey begins, it's good to have that oversight. So you're not just focusing on, this is what I have, how can we make an instant gain, but also how can we put that strategy in place given what we know about one site and take it across all sites. And then that energy efficiency and that certificate dual approach really, really works.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for coming
you.
today. It's been a lovely conversation, even though it has been absolutely baking. And yes, thank you very much for listening. We hope you enjoyed, and we look forward to providing you with another NUS Now podcast in the near future. If you have any questions, please feel free to send them in the link in the description or contact your NUS consultant. We'll see you soon.